Thank you very much. You're welcome. How many of us were here at the last summit, May? How many? Okay, great. All right, so this morning I'll be talking with us on what I call the lessons of generations. The lessons of generations. It's going to be a lot of information that I've squashed into a short time, and I'll also try to make it as brief as possible. Before I continue, I want to appreciate the platform that I've been given. I not take it for granted. Please, can we give a round of applause to the host? And because I'm part of the team, please, I'd like you to celebrate my team behind, please. Thank you very much. All right, so I'll go right into it. I call it the lessons of generations. Now, there's something they call it demographic cohorts. These are people who are born within a particular time span. You know, every generation has been studied and analyzed. Their trends, their inclinations, their political views, their religiosity, their number, their behavioral patterns. You know, so everybody literally on earth falls into what you call a demographic cohort. That is a group of people born within a particular space of time. And we will be looking at a few of them, from one that is called the baby boomers till what we call Generation Z. Okay? So I will just go through them very quickly. And then the idea is that we want to be able to look at the particular traits and characteristics of each of these generations and be able to see how we can take advantage of each generation's peculiarity. Okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about. There are a few of them. I'll just list them out, off my head. There's the lost generation. There is the greatest generation. There is the silent generation. There is the baby boomers. There are the Generation X. And then there are the millennials or Generation Y. Then we also have Generation Z, or what you call the neo internet natives. Okay? And then we have not figured out what the next generation after Z will be. Well, but tentatively, they are calling it Generation Alpha. You know, they're starting all over again. You see, but it's an interesting trend and it's an interesting study because it lets us see what each generation has been through. And it serves as a guide for us to guide our own lives, to know what mistakes we shouldn't make and how we can address and take advantage of opportunities that each generation offers. Now, you need to know that because every person falls into a generational category, we are able to, we are able to perceive the general inclination of that person. So why am I saying this? Economically, by the time we are done, I want you to be able to assess where your market is. Are you getting now? Where is your market? Who are you selling what you want to sell to? I want you to be able to find out where your capital is. Who are the guys who have the big bucks? And what kind of things are they inclined to? Are they skeptical? Are they pragmatic? Are they risk takers? Are they creative? Do you get the point? So the idea is for us to be able to look at each of these, and then we also need to ask ourselves, okay, where is what I call the community? Because when we get to Generation Z, you realize that the community has changed from what we see as regular society to what you call online micro-communities. So for instance, when you go on Twitter, there's a hashtag called Abuja Twitter community. So if you put out an advert and you tag, you put out a tweet and then you put a hashtag Abuja Twitter community, people within that community respond to you. How many of us also know that there's what they call the Arewa Twitter community? So you see that they are what we call micro online communities or societies. Those things help you, project. It helps you harness what might be advantages that, you can use for your business or, for impact or for spread, for influence and all of that. The idea is for us to become more useful and be more relevant in our society. All right, so I'm going to start from the baby boomers. The silent generation, I could talk about that briefly. That's the generation that Martin Luther King Jr. came from. They were sort of the quiet but conservative generation. They are the generation that supported what they call Nixon's silent majority. They were the people who voted for Nixon to be able to withdraw from the Korean War or so. Yeah, the Korean War. That's why they are termed the silent generation, or what they call the lucky few. They fall between the year 1928 and 1945. The next generation is what we call the baby boomers. This is when pretty much industrialization has started picking up. They span from the year 1946 to 1964. They were much more larger in number than the previous generation. And what that meant was that there was a larger market to advertise to. They have been tagged as the most advertised. They've been tagged as the generation that was most advertised to. They advertised cigarettes to them. They advertised entertainment, clothing, and all of that. So because of that number, because they had that demographic, they had that economic value. Now, for you to properly understand the generation called the baby boomers, wow, my time is gone. For you to understand generation baby boomers, you have to look at the generation called the greatest generation. The greatest generation was the generation that fought the World War II. And because they were seen as the generation that literally saved the world, from communism and the Nazi folk. So after that, there was a huge decline in population. And then I think the euphoria of the success of the World War made people have a lot of children. So that's why their population was that much. They are the generation that experienced the transistor radio and the television. And that's also why they were able to be marketed to a lot, because that's where we started having TV adverts and then radio adverts, radio shows, radio programs. That was the age of information. Information spread fast, in that age. So basically, they have been called a spoilt generation because they had everything going well for them. There were government subsidies given to them. They were able to buy houses. They were able to get jobs immediately after, graduation. I'm sure some of your parents may have told you when we graduated, there was B2 waiting for you, or 504, That was their generation. They were literally spoiled. My dad would tell me back then that they used to give them food on campus. Do you know that? Yes, Now, but you don't even know if you have a cafeteria in your university right now, So that was the generation. They were the spoiled generation. They came to a lot of wealth and comfort very quickly, but that also did not pan out well because they were the generation that eventually plunged the world into what was called the Great Recession. Because of that amount of wealth and ease that they came into, they pushed, the economy into that distress. After them, you have the Generation X. You might be familiar with this generation. They fall between 1965 and 1980. They are the entrepreneurial generation. They were the ones who started doing contracts. That's when you started hearing contracts. My dad is a supplier, of goods or stuff. He's in building construction and all that. They were the generation that were entrepreneurial because the generation before them did not plan for them. They did not trust the system anymore because the system started crumbling after them, after the generation of baby boomers. Now, when I say the generation of baby boomers, you need to understand that the time where they were born was not the time they came to adulthood. So they came to adulthood around the time Generation X was coming to the adolescent age. So they saw what these ones were doing, and it affected their own psyche. They became, more pragmatic with money, and they were more, organized. they were more adventurous. They saw that the system itself may not give you as much wealth as being entrepreneurial. So they are the more settled, grounded generation. You will also realize by the time we get to Generation Y, which is the millennial generation, that every generation usually births the next generation. Now, what this means is this. Obviously, if you were 20 or 22-year-old, you probably won't get married then. You'll be getting married, say, 25 or 27. Now, it means your children will be in the generation after yours. So there will be 2 generations after your own. So the millennials are the direct descendants, permit me to use that word, of the baby boomers. And I don't need to tell you about the millennials. You know, let me use we, because I think I might fall into them. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that I fall into, but, they are also tagged as a spoiled generation in a sense. But you cannot blame them because they were born at the time where the economy was in distress. Now, the mark of this generation is that they graduate with high college debt. For those in the US, in Nigeria, you graduate and there are no jobs. So it's in this generation that professionalism was rebirthed. So you see that maybe 10, let's say 15 years ago, nobody wanted to be associated with who was a photographer. But now, where's Champion? Champion is the coolest photographer right now, He's wearing Ankara, pants and all that. He's looking cool. But 15 years ago, nobody wanted to date a photographer. So that's to show you how the millennials have been able to reinvent themselves. They saw that, okay, the system as they know it won't work. There are no regular jobs. You see that millennials are becoming carpenters. They are becoming professional painters. They are becoming electricians. They are becoming even mechanics. True? Yeah. So they are taking advantage of the fact that the system no longer functions and they have moved beyond what is to what can be. So you have the millennial generation. They are also called digital natives or internet natives. Now, they are the first people who came to adulthood during the time of the internet. So they are very used to social media and computers. They are differentiated from the Generation Z in that the Generation Y is used to computers, physical PCs, while Generation Y is used to the mobile phone. Okay, because they were born or came to adulthood at the time where, we were moving from just the physical PCs and the internet at large to now mobile apps, where you now even see that, like in China, you have super apps where you can purchase, you can buy stuff, you can pay for stuff, you can chat, you can everything is literally on one app. And also you see that coming also to Nigeria with the OPay app, right? Okay, so that's to show you the progression. Now, I've shown you this so that you can look at each generation, because when you look at it critically, all the big names that have the capital are probably going to be in the baby boomer generation, or they are going to be in Generation X generation. So when you look at them, you can analyze the kind of persons they are, what kind of risk they are willing to take, what it will take for you to persuade them to spend money on your dream or your idea. Okay? That is where your capital is. Now, when you talk about your market is no longer just on the street. Yes, there's a market on the street, but there's also a greater community online. You hear people even talk about right now about the online education community. People are making lots of money by just teaching. They don't even teach, they just record lessons and put it online, and they are making a lot of money. That's because the community has changed. It's no longer just the physical. It's now, everything is going online. Streaming platforms online. Everything has gone online. I also need to mention that before now, if you were going to be playing games, if kids were playing games, the parents will, you're not going to do well. You are going to be a failure. You are spending your time on useless stuff. Right now, one of the most wealthiest online identities, he's a gamer. And he has almost 40 to 80 million viewers online. Architect Ape should know the guy, PewDiePie. Fantastic guy. That's how he earns his money, by playing game. Won't you encourage your own children to play game now? Yeah. So the idea is for us to look at the past, look at the present, and project into the future. I want to leave a word with you. For those of you who have kids already, there's every possibility that your kids will not go to a regular school. Thank you very much.